I should have disconnected that keyboard. All right, here we are. We are going to be working on section 4.6, okay, solving by factoring. And some of these problems are really simple, okay? And some will be a little harder because you're going to have to actually do work. The first couple of problems, we have to do really no work at all, okay? But before we move into that, I just want to remind you of something really quick that you should already know. This is from Algebra 1, okay? It's called the zero product property. Okay, so the zero product property. All right, so again, in Algebra 1, you guys learned something called the zero product property. What the zero product property basically said was, if you have two things that are multiplied together, so let's just say A times B, and their result is 0. So you multiply two things and your answer is 0. Then does it make sense that either A or B must be 0? Right? If A is 0, then 0 times B is 0. If B is 0, then A times 0 is 0. Right? So either A has to be 0 or B has to be 0. So I'm going to say if this is true, then A has to be 0 or B has to be 0. So this is called the zero product property. It is something they teach you in Algebra 1, maybe even Math 8. I'm not sure how far this thing goes back, to be honest with you. Usually you do have to be able to factor. So if you can recall, once you were factoring at some point, that's when you probably saw it. But this is basically the only thing I have to teach you for today. And it's not even that I have to teach it to you. You guys already know this. You just got to be reminded. Okay? There was a property you know. It's called the zero product property. Okay? And it basically says if you multiply two things and they equal 0, then one of those two things is probably a 0. Okay? So that's the whole idea. So why do I show you this? All right. Let's work on your homework. Okay? So let's look at question number 2. Okay, question 2 says x minus 6 times 8x minus 7 equals 0. Now you see how there's two things that are being multiplied? There's one parenthesis and another parenthesis, right? And they equal 0. So what they're basically saying, according to this property, is that either x minus 6 equals 0 or 8x minus 7 equals to 0. That's what they're saying. One of those has to be 0. Okay? So all you have to do is solve. So if I add 6 to both sides, I get x equal to 6. For the other one, if I add 7 to both sides, I get 8x equals to 7. And what do I have to do to find x? Just divide, right? Divide by 8. So x would be 7/8. Which one is my answer from those four options? So it's A, yeah. So that's not that hard, right? If you have two things that are multiplied together and it equals to 0, then you just get to set them each equal to 0 and solve. Notice, for question 1, you would put n plus 4 equal to 0 and n minus 1 equal to 0. For question number 4, you would let v, just v, because it's v times v minus 6, right? So just v would equal 0 and v minus 6 would equal 0. But what about something like number 3? Because is number 3 two things multiplied together? Now this is kind of a trick question. Is it two things multiplied together? X plus 3 quantity squared? Right? Can I rewrite x plus 3 quantity squared equals 0 as x plus 3 times x plus 3? Is that the same thing? Yeah, it is. Right? Now, do I have two things that are multiplied together and they equal to 0? Yeah, right? So let's go ahead and solve. I'm going to set x plus 3 equal to 0 or x plus 3 equal to 0. Now, usually my students say, do I have to solve them both since they're identical? No, you don't. Just solve one of them, okay? So if you subtract 3, sorry about that, we get x equal to negative 3. And remember, this one, don't even worry about it, okay? It's the same problem. So what's my answer? A, B, C, or D? So that's going to be D, right? Okay. Notice the next couple problems. They're the same, okay? So they're the same thing. So 5 and 6, let's do number 5. So I'm going to give you guys a little bit of time, okay? Probably about a minute. Do question number 5. All right, so there's your solutions for this. But I hope you guys don't find this too difficult to do, at least not yet, okay? They're already pre-factored for you. So all you have to do is get the factors, set them equal to 0, and solve, okay? When this starts to get a little bit more challenging is when we start doing things like this. Notice, for these problems, they're not factored for me. I'm going to have to do it. Okay? I'm going to have to factor these problems myself. Okay? So, we'll start off with like number 7. We'll do number 8 since that's a different type, and then we'll move on. Okay? But let's try number 7. So since it's not factored, I have to factor it first. So, X method. Remember, this is your A, your B, and your C. Okay? There's my A, B, and C. So, what do I put on top of my X? Well, A times C, right? A times C, that's a negative 5. What do I put on the bottom? My B value, a positive 4. What two numbers multiply to a negative 5 but add to a positive 4? One of them will be positive, then one of them will be negative. What two numbers? 5 and negative 1. Good. So 5 and negative 1. Okay. Do I have to divide 5 and negative 1? No, right? Why? Because A is what? A is 1, right? If A is 1, there's no need to divide. So here's my answer. So R plus 5, R minus 1 equals to 0, right? Why do I put equals to 0? Well, because that's what they have in the beginning of the problem, that equals 0. Well, all I have to do now is get those two factors and solve for each one. Okay, so here we go. R plus 5 equals 0. R minus 1 equals 0. Solve for both of them and find your answers. Okay? So if I subtract 5 on both sides, I get R equal to negative 5. I'll add 1 over here to both sides. I get R equal to 1. So here are my two solutions to the problem. So that would be what? B. There you go. So was this that much harder? Well, if you understand factoring, you might say not really, right? Because it's just factor the thing and then get your factors and set them equal to 0, just like we did in the previous 6 problems. Okay? So it's not meant to be that much more difficult. Why? Because I just taught you how to do the stuff on the left side, the X method. We talked about that for a couple days, right? So we've already done that. The only new part is you're getting your parenthesis parts and solving for them. That's it. That's the only new part. This right here is new. The rest of it is old. That's stuff we did before. Okay? So hopefully this isn't like overwhelming you and you're thinking, I've never seen this before, because we've done most of it before, just not the solving part. Okay? The solving part was a little different. Now, I told you I'd do number 8 with you guys because what is that called? That has a special name. Anybody remember the name of something like that? It's called something. It's two terms. There's a subtraction in the middle. Starts with the letter D. Maybe I'll give you the first word. Difference. No, it doesn't ring a bell? Yeah, difference of two squares. Okay, this is a difference of two squares. All right? So whenever you factor that, you just use parentheses like this. Okay, that's all you have to do. So what squared is v squared? What letter do I square to get v squared? Anybody know? Just a v. What number do I square to get a 1? A 1. So all you have to do is write v minus 1, v plus 1, and then don't forget to put equals 0. Again, why do we put equals 0? Because that's what the problem wants us to do. Anytime something is set equal to 0, they want you to solve. Okay? So we're going to solve. Now that we have both factors, though, I can just write v minus 1 equals 0, v plus 1 equals 0, and I'll solve. So let's add 1 on both sides. So I get v equals 1, and I'll subtract 1 on both sides. So v equals negative 1. And those are my two solutions, which is D. Okay? So you're factoring, you're solving. For the first 6 problems, you don't have to factor. They're already done for you. Okay? But I know your homework sometimes gets mixed up. But there are 6 problems where they're not going to make you factor. The rest of them, they are. Okay, they're going to make you factor. So let's go find something a little bit more challenging. Okay? So right now we'll look at like number 12 or 14. I think I'm going to I may cut out the rest of these problems. I'm just looking really quick. I'm probably going to get rid of 3 problems for you guys, okay? Just so I can make it 14 problems or so instead. I don't want it to be too big of an assignment. But let's look at number 11. And then we'll look at number 12, then we'll be done, okay? So if you look at number 11, there's 2 terms. So if there's 2 terms, your brain should right away say, oh, difference of 2 squares. But is that a difference of 2 squares? No, right? You're shaking your head. If anything, that's called a sum, right? You're adding 2 things. So it's not a difference of 2 squares, but it's 2 terms. So what I want to do is I want to look for my GCF, my greatest common factor. What do they have in common? 5k squared plus 3k. What do they have in common? A k, yeah. So let's take a k out. And all that's left is 5k plus 3. Now, is that 2 things multiplied together equal to 0? Is that what you see right there? 2 things that are multiplied together, right? A k and a 5k plus 3. That's 2 things that are multiplied together, and they're equal to 0. So what I get to do is say, all right, k has to be 0, and 5k plus 3 has to be 0. Is there anything for me to solve with the first one where it just says k equals 0? No, right? That's done. That's done. But on this one, I'll subtract 3. So that gives me 5k equals negative 3. And then I'll divide by 5. So k is equal to negative 3/5. So that would be D. Again, on your homework, it mixes up the letters, so don't just say D. That's what he put, right? Look for the answer, negative 3/5 comma 0, okay? Because it does mix up the problems. It mixes up the options as well. Before I do the last example, do you guys have any questions on any of this? Factoring, setting your factors equal to 0 to solve. So you guys are okay? Remember, we've done the hard part. The factoring part we've learned already. Okay, we've done that before. That was sections 4, what was it, 4.4 and 4.5. Okay, we did that stuff before. So hopefully that's not the hard part for you guys. Hopefully you can factor no problem. The only thing that's new is when you get those two things you multiply and you set them equal to 0. Okay, but that's not even new because you've done that before. All right, you've done that in Algebra 1 for sure. So hopefully none of this seems brand new and it all kind of seems to make sense. Now, remember how I told you guys whenever you're solving, if it says equals to 0, that means you're going to solve it, right? Remember I just told you that right now? If it's equal to 0, that means they want you to solve. Well, notice how questions like number 12, 13, and 14 are not equal to 0. So what do you think I have to do if it's not equal to 0? If there's something on the right side, what do you think I have to do with that something on the right side? Any ideas? No? So if there's something on one side of an equation, what I want to do is move it, right? I want to move it to the other side. That way there's a 0, right? I want to make sure it always says equal to 0. So let's look at question number 12, like I told you guys. If I want to make it equal to 0, what do I do with that minus 3? What should I do to both sides? I think someone said it. Say it louder. Add it. Thank you. So let's go ahead and add it. So let me write this down. X squared minus 7x plus 7 equals negative 3. I'm just going to add it. So x squared minus 7x plus 10 equals 0. And that's perfect. I need it to be equal to 0. Okay, so I've done that so far. So that's what you're going to do with number 13 and number 14. You're going to want to set it equal to 0. Okay? Now that it's set like that, I can do the x method to factor that piece. So on the top, you multiply. Let me write down the a, b, and c. On the top, you're going to multiply a times c, which is 10. On the bottom, you're going to put your b value, which is a negative 7. Okay, what two numbers multiply to 10 but add up to a negative 7? All right, negative 5 and a negative 2. Do I have to divide these numbers? No, because my a term is a 1. Okay, so we're done with this. Here's my factored form. X minus 5, x minus 2 equals 0. Okay, why do we set it equal to 0? Because that's what it said before I factored it, right? Something equals 0. So something equals 0. Now that they're both equal to 0, I can split them apart and solve for each one. So you would have x minus 5 equals 0, x minus 2 equals 0. And from here, just solve it. And it's not a hard thing to solve, right? Just add and you're done. So plus 5. So you get x equals 5, and the other one you're just going to add 2. And that's what you get for your two solutions. So that would be, there's a lot of different D answers, right? Well, don't worry, it'll mix them up for you guys. So hopefully it's not all of them just being the letter D. I hope not. But that's what you guys have for homework today, okay? You're going to have to factor for sure. Actually, no, that's a lie. If you did them in order, the first 6 problems do not require you to factor, okay? The first 6 problems are already pre-factored for you. So, but once they get factored, you're going to set each factor equal to 0 and solve, okay? And that shouldn't be a hard thing. Like I said, usually maybe a 2-step problem at the most, but usually it just requires you to add or subtract and you're done, okay? So there'll be 6 of the easier types. And there's going to be 6, I'll give you like 12, maybe I'll give you 8 of these tougher ones just for better practice. But we've done a bunch of them, so you'll have a lot less to work on. Okay? And I know that there's a whole bunch at the end, but I'm probably just going to get rid of some of these just so that it's not overdoing. Because, you know, I always tell people, if you can't do something once because you have no idea, then why am I going to give you 6 problems on the one thing you can't do, right? So I don't need to overkill the homework, okay? So I know there's like 20 problems almost. We'll just make it 14. We'll get rid of 6 of them. Once you do these a couple times, it doesn't matter how many times I get you to do it, you're going to still be able to do them. So anyway, so that's the end of that.